Hello, everyone. This week, again, long week with no reading done. So I'm going to plug National Novel Writing Month. It's also called NaNoWriMo. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about dungeon design. Also, our cacti aren't growing, which is kind of disappointing. So I've been doing NaNoWriMo now for 5 or 6 years, maybe a little more. Um, and I think maybe one or one and a half of those ideas could get published these days if I were to put a whole lot more work into them. Because again, they're not exactly quality. But still, I like doing NaNoWriMo, and even though a lot of people have, I've talked with a lot of people about it because it's one of the few interesting things I do. So I like saying that my reason for doing this is that I have an audience of one, essentially. Uh, Honestly, most creative endeavors I feel like should really start that way. Even if your goal is to eventually publish and make money, you should make something that you actually like first. Like, it should be something you enjoy creating and would enjoy consuming if someone else created it. Uh, Even if, like me, most of what you end up writing is garbage, if it's garbage that makes you happy, that's an excellent use of your time. You're going to learn stuff from it. So, write garbage, create garbage that makes you happy. You might even get lucky, and you might write something that isn't garbage, or that is garbage, but look at some of the stuff that gets published. So, you may even make something like that that makes you happy and you get some success out of. But even if you don't, even if you end up having years and years of failed or stalled projects, you can learn from them. And that's in general a good thing. So, you should try something new, whether it's NaNoWriMo or something else. You should fail spectacularly and make some feel good garbage for yourself. This year, I'm thinking, I might not, but I'm gonna try something different from a standard approach to NaNoWriMo. I've got an idea and I actually like it, even if it might end up being bad. But I've shared it with a few people, to workshop it to make sure it's not just on its face a terrible idea. And I think I have a strong enough idea for a month long project. I might execute it terribly, who knows, but it'll be fun. It'll be a fun thing to do in November. So, the next thing that I want to talk about, because again, I didn't do my reading, so I'm going to talk a little bit more. Is dungeon design, because this afternoon I'm finalizing the first adventure for a new campaign for some players here. This is going to be my time to shamelessly plug a link to the draft fantasy world that I'm using for the current D&D that I run. It's in the link will be in the transcript. If you've gone to my blog before, you may have seen my general approach to one-shot adventures, but this is going to be more talking about dungeon design. There's an article in the Alexandrian about what the author there calls decaying the dungeon. I may have pronounced that wrong. And that's a very detailed, very good explanation of how to make, living, breathing, intricate dungeons. But that's really not what I'm going to talk about here. I'm not going to focus on the actual layout of your dungeon. And if that's what you want to hear about, again, that article in the Alexandrian, there should be a link in the transcript, is really good for that. It covers a lot of great information. What I want to focus on instead isn't the actual layout of your dungeon, but that each dungeon needs to tell a story, right? I've got three big points I want to mention very briefly, and this isn't going to be anything new to people who have read a lot of, how to DM, what should I do when I write an adventure, these sorts of things. So I'm going to hit them very briefly, and maybe if I keep not doing my reading, since these are things I can talk about a little extemporaneously, I might talk about them a little more in future weeks, just because again, I can talk about these without a whole lot of prep time. So first, before you can make a dungeon, you need a why. The players and antagonists need a reason to be here. This is usually pretty easy, right? Because a dungeon is often the the capstone of whatever the adventure is. This is when the heroes are going to take action instead of just reacting to the villain's plot. So the heroes mount the offensive on the Death Star, they climb Mount Doom. Knowing this this reason. It's something that writers call motivation. And in a lot of modern stories lately, writers kind of skimp on that. The motivation is very bare bones, very basic. But you still need that motivation because it's going to give you clues on how you want to design your dungeon, right? Is this an established base? Has the villain or the antagonist retreated to this convenient cave system and it's just sort of a natural thing that they're hiding in? Did they make this bolt hole as part of a plan? The motivation for the players gives you a sense of urgency, right? Because one problem I mention a lot is that players often shift into a pure gamer problem solving mode. Motivation is what you as a DM give them to try and help break them of that habit. If you've ever been running an adventure and then players stop in the middle of the dungeon and say, wait, 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 we skipped a door back there and there might be experience or loot there. We should go open that door before we go forward. Your narrative, your motivation, why the players are there, wasn't strong enough to override the game system that the players are working in. So, my goal when I'm running a game is to try and get players to make a decision based on game world reasons rather than game system reasons. And that actually might be a much more interesting thing to talk about than, in general, how to design a dungeon. But we're already here, so we're going to keep going. So, second, now that you know why they're here, your players need to be able to figure out their antagonist's motivation and plan. And the important thing about that is you want to do this without a single inhabitant of the dungeon having to say a word. Your players may never talk to anyone, they may never give the villain a chance to do some dramatic monologue. And so you need a way for your players to understand the story of this place that they're going through without someone giving them an info dump. Likewise, knowing your villain's motivation and your villain in general is going to give you clues on how to do that, because not every villain is going to be leaving convenient Resident Evil style diaries scattered around that you can, pick up and read and put together the clues, right? You're going to need to come up with different ways to get information to your players so that at the end of the adventure, your players can sit back and piece together what happened, what the villain was doing in this place, how they were hoping to accomplish their goals, and the players should be able to, from all of this, come up with ways to stop the villain that don't necessarily involve direct violence. Because not every solution in your game needs to end with a, long, drawn-out fight. Which brings me to the third thing. Your encounters need to be well thought out. And the ideal way for this is that each encounter should build in complexity, but it needs to be in a coherent manner. You should introduce new concepts or antagonists as they get further into the dungeon, and then you should start combining the environment and enemies in novel ways. And each room should feel unique and different. You can have a room that's purely an exploration encounter with some new environmental hazard that's going to play through the rest of the dungeon, and you just have a room where they learn how to navigate that, where they learn how to spot certain kinds of traps, how to avoid those traps, where there's no actual monster or antagonist in that room besides the environment they're trying to go in. And just like anywhere else, you can have breather rooms that are just sort of there to let them get their bearings. These are good places to put clues, to give them a breather. Because you basically can't turn your character's adrenaline up the entire time, right? You can't, from the moment at the door to the moment at the end, it can't be a constant fight. And then the dungeon's finale should probably be your most complex mechanical and narrative moment in the fight, in the dungeon. So it might be a fight, it might be a chase, it needs to just be something where the players need to know, this is where we need to pull out all the stops. This is the climax of the adventure, and here's where success or failure really can be decided. But the important thing is that don't just make this a brawl with a legendary monster, and give players multiple ways to fail and succeed with an objective that's more complicated than kill the bad guy. This is where motivation and clues lead into. Your players should reach this finale, and they should have a plan of what do we want here and how do we get it. That they should understand both the antagonists they're facing and the environment they're in. And this is the moment for them to put all of these things together that you've shown them and that they've learned. And they can now use this information to avoid these dangers or exploit them to their own advantage. So when they complete the dungeon, and just as an aside, I come from the school of DMing where your players are expected to win. It should be hard. They should have challenges. But if you made an adventure where you didn't think they were going to win, you set up a bad adventure. They should have a fair chance to get to the end and achieve their goals. So this advice basically requires you to be on board with that sort of thinking when you're running a game. At the end of the dungeon, whether they succeeded or failed, the characters should feel like they've accomplished something. Even if that something was, we tried, and we didn't succeed, but we tried. Like, there should be a feeling of that for the characters. For the players, this should be a mechanically cathartic feeling. That feeling you get at the end of a game where, like, you've cleared a difficult stage, you've solved an interesting puzzle. They should feel that same feeling at the end of the dungeon, while their characters are experiencing, the more traditional sense of catharsis, right? That feeling of, okay, we've experienced something and it's good. We're through it now. That may not be actually the right definition of catharsis, but we're moving on. And this is an interesting concept, that what your players should feel and what their characters are experiencing, they're not going to exactly be the same. They're not going to perfectly track. And that would probably also be a really neat topic to talk about at another time. But right now, I just wanted to cover those three big points, right? Know why everyone's here. Figure out how to explain to your players why they're here, what the villain's doing here, and what's going on. Give them the story. And then the end needs to feel like an ending. It should feel climactic, and everything throughout the dungeon should build to that moment when the players have that do or die moment where they really have to, show that they are the heroes, the protagonists. They have to go all in. And just as an aside, even though I, started this as kind of mini book reports, since I haven't actually done one for a few weeks now, I kind of just enjoy talking about things that I like. So even if no one is listening, still, thank you if you're listening. And I've got to finish this dungeon and some actual work later on today. So thank you again. And I guess I will probably do another one of these next week. Have a good day.